Hello wrestling fans. Pro Wrestling Machine here with an entry from 97. Fascinating time in wrestling. If you find this video useful, I implore you to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more Pro Wrestling Machine learning. Now, here we go. December 1st, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. World War III coverage. November to Remember preview. Bait and switch on Raw. Stanley Blackburn passes away, and more. By Observer staff. For a company with more talent depth than perhaps any wrestling company in history, there is really no excuse to present a lineup that appeared going in to be so weak on paper as WCW did for World War III on November 23rd. For a company with more talent depth than perhaps any wrestling company in history, there is really no excuse to present a lineup that appeared going in to be so weak on paper as WCW did for World War III on November 23rd. And the lineup was every bit the precursor for the show. Sure, the show did great business, a near sellout crowd of 17,128, with 15,735 paying $407,831 plus another $139,191 in merchandise. At the Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan, the gate figure destroyed the record set just a few weeks earlier at Halloween Havoc in Las Vegas of 197,500. It fell just shy of the company's all-time attendance record set on June 9 in Boston, 18,003 fans and 16,025 paid. But most of the tickets were purchased before the matches were announced, largely coming off a successful August 4th Nitro appearance in the same building, which actually drew more people into the building because it was somewhat papered. With the three-ring 60-man battle royal gimmick, which has never worked in the past from a television standpoint on top and too many of the heavy hitters off the undercard, it was a poor show from a company with far too much talent to have an excuse for such a card. It wasn't as if it was big names getting a lot of heat while shortcutting their way through bad matches, but it was a lot of people who aren't over being put in a position above their league but from a working and perception standpoint, and the crowd responding in kind. The Battle Royal itself was shot better than the distracting three-ring 20-minute-long test patterns with multiple announcing teams from the previous 2 years, but the match itself may have been the worst of the three. Certainly it was the most uneventful, with only one slim fabric of a storyline presented, the constant near eliminations of Rey Mysterio Jr., and the ball was even dropped on that one as he went out before the finals and the cameras didn't catch nor did the announcers notice when he was eliminated after all the teases. The entire NWO being together at the finish was the same as last year, but last year at least had a more exciting finish. Mysterio Jr. and Eddie Guerrero stole the show, but in the words of Jim Cornette, it was petty theft. They had what would have been an incredible match had any two other wrestlers in this world done it, with inventing new moves and some incredible spots, but due to a little sloppiness and hesitation after missed spots by Mysterio Jr., it fell well short of the match of the year standard they had set last month and that people were going in with the inflated expectations of. The other good match on paper from last month, Ultimo Dragon vs. Yuji Nagata, was good, but again not nearly on the level as their previous match, perhaps due to Dragon not being 100% after elbow surgery, and lacked heat. Ric Flair vs. Curt Hennig had the expected good psychology, and the selling of the legs was as good as anything you would see in pro wrestling, partially because some of the pain appeared to be real, but Hennig these days is inconsistent at best, and Flair has his good days and his bad days, and this was one of those days where he made the effort to have a good day but somehow didn't. 1. Mang Yuli Fifita and Barbarian Sinvalehi beat Glacier Ray Lloyd and Ernest Miller in 9:09. It was fast-paced but not good. The kicks employed by Glacier and Miller looked bad, and the selling by Mang and Barbarian, or lack thereof, didn't help that perception. There was one cool sequence when Miller ran across the ring and basically climbed up Mang's body to the top rope and do a plancha to the floor onto Barbarian. Glacier then followed with a pescado on Mang. Glacier began selling after being backdropped by Mang into a power bomb by Barbarian. Fans were chanting boring by this point. Miller got the hot tag, and then nailed Jimmy Hart, allowing Mang to come from behind with the Tongan death grip for the pin. Dud. 2. Perry Saturn Perry Sotelo pinned Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, in 8:19 to retain the WCW TV title. This was even a lot worse than their title change match on Nitro, as they didn't work well at all together. Inferno looked the worst he's looked since returning. Saturn's offense was stiff enough, but he had no transitions between moves and he is still favoring his right leg badly, although it is nothing short of amazing that he's even in the ring at this point. They did lots of near falls, but the horrible transitions made it look minor league in this setting. Disco used a chartbuster, Stone Cold Stunner, on Kidman and a short blonde-haired new guy who apparently will be called Skank. He's a power plant guy and all we know is that his real name is Brad. He then tried one on Hammer who wouldn't sell the move, and then did a no-sell spot on a punch allowing Saturn to get him from behind. In the ring, Disco did swinging neckbreaker for a near fall and came off the top with a crossbody, but Saturn rolled through on the move and got the submission doing his Rings of Saturn, double armbar. 1/4 star. 3. Yuji Nagata pinned Ultimo Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, in 12:45 in a match where Dragon won. He'd get 5 minutes alone with Sonny Wanu. Dragon had his elbow heavily taped after surgery to remove floating bone chips, which the last match was used as the angle to explain the injury. Dragon went after Wanu and had him up for a suplex when Nagata got him from behind. Nagata worked on the head with pile drivers and back suplexes. The fans weren't into this match although the work was solid. Dragon made a comeback with great kicking combinations. They did one awesome spot where Dragon going for a pescado, but Nagata moving and going to catch him with a kick. However, Dragon caught the foot and turned it into a dragon screw on the floor. Dragon then hit a great plancha and a power bomb off the ropes for a near fall. He followed with a moonsault for a great near fall. He put on the Dragon sleeper, but Ono had the ref distracted and didn't see the submission. Dragon broke the hold selling like he thought he had won. When Nagata attacked him from behind, Dragon beat him to the punch and finally maneuvered him into his spinning Hurricane Rana from the top rope, but Wanu put Nagata's leg on the ropes to break the pin. Dragon then tried a back suplex, but Nagata kicked off of Wanu, who took a bump, but landed on Dragon for the pin. 3 stars. 4. Rick and Scott Steiner, Robert and Scott Reach Steiner, beat David Taylor and Steven Regal, Darren Matthews, to retain the WCW tag titles in 9:45. Steiner's got the big reaction coming out because they're locals, but the heat didn't translate much into the match. Work was solid. Taylor and Regal's offense consisted of good wrestling, and the uppercut forearms which the Steiners sold big. Steiners came back with their usual suplexes, although none of the more spectacular ones. Typical Steiners match in that they got heat on Scott, and Rick got the hot tag and they went right to the finish. In this case, Rick pinned Regal after a sky-high bulldog off the top. 2 stars. 5. Raven Scott Levy pinned Scotty Riggs, Scott on tall, in 8:43. Before the match, J.J. Dillon announced that Raven had 24 hours to sign a WCW contract or he wouldn't be given any more television time for matches and interviews. Raven said it had to be a no DQ match or he wouldn't wrestle. Riggs opened doing a plancha on Raven, Saturn and Kidman. With Saturn's knee, even catching a move like that is a risky proposition. Crowd was dead until Saturn gave Raven a chair. Raven used a hard chair shot to the back. Riggs came back with a drop toe hold spot onto the chair, mimicking the move that gave Riggs his eye injury. Riggs threw Raven the chair and dropkicked the chair into his face, sort of mimicking Rob Van Dam's Van Daminator. Raven came back using a DDT and grabbed the mic and told Riggs how he felt his pain and how it hurt him more than it was hurting Riggs. Raven ended up doing a second DDT and said that he felt Riggs' pain to try and further tease Riggs joining his group, and finally after the third DDT walked away and the ref counted to 10 signifying a knockout victory. After the match, Hammer carried Riggs from the ring into the crowd, I guess to signify them kidnapping his soul. 3/4 star. 6. Steve McMichael pinned Alex Wright with a tombstone piledriver in 3:36. McMichael came out with a lead pipe and said that Bill Goldberg, his scheduled opponent, wouldn't be there. The cameras panned to the back with Goldberg passed out on the floor. In reality, he couldn't wrestle due to his groin injury. What's Mongo's excuse? McMichael challenged anyone in the dressing room to come out. Deborah McMichael came out dragging a reluctant Wright to the ring. Alex didn't want to come out, probably scared to death what another dud match would do to his batting average. The match was terrible, but at least it was shorter than their previous match, so not quite as bad. 1 star. 7. Eddie Guerrero retained the WCW Cruiserweight title pinning Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, in 12:42. The first big spot was Guerrero hitting a wheelbarrow German suplex dropping Mysterio Jr. on his head. Mike Tenay brought up and there was a poster in the crowd about this being the 3-year anniversary of the death of Guerrero's former tag team partner Art Barr. At one point the two created a very intricate set of spots ending with Guerrero superplexing Mysterio Jr. off the top rope. Guerrero went for a frog splash, Mysterio Jr. moved and Guerrero rolled with the fall landing on his feet and Mysterio Jr. leapt up with a Hurricane Rana for a near fall. Mysterio Jr. used Guerrero as a base for all kinds of great spinning head scissors maneuvers. At another point Guerrero tried the sunset flip powerbomb over the top rope off the apron onto the floor, but Mysterio Jr. turned it into a Hurricane Rana on the floor, which was a dangerous spot since Guerrero nearly hit his head on the floor rolling over. Mysterio Jr. then did a running twisting midair dive over the top. He got a near fall with a springboard moonsault. Mysterio Jr. tried another Hurricane Rana, but it was dropped into a power bomb. Guerrero got a near fall with a pin coming off a Goria special, then used another Goria special, and Mysterio Jr. turned it into his own near fall with a Toyota roll. The match got sluggish for a few seconds around 11 minutes when Mysterio Jr. missed a move and both hesitated noticeably. Mysterio Jr. came back with a springboard leg drop for a near fall and got a great near fall after an incredible springboard somersault Hurricane Rana. The finish saw Guerrero do a modified stun gun type maneuver and get the pin after a frog splash. 4 stars. 8. Curt Hennig retained the U.S. title pinning Ric Flair, Richard Fliehr, in 1757. This was a weird match in that as it was laid out, it appeared to be a great match. The crowd was into Flair when he came out, but when the crowd recognizes he's no longer the old Flair and a match slows down, they lose interest. Yet the match built and the selling was great, and Flair did more than he has in the ring in a long time, including some of his trademark bumps that he hasn't done with regularity of late. They brawled in the stands early. Flair came off the top to the floor with a double sledge a la Savage, which is one hell of a dangerous move to try, and 48 years old, and it appeared his ankle went out. He was limping badly for a while, but after a few minutes he seemed to walk okay with the leg only buckling occasionally, and Hennig worked the leg to make it appear that was the storyline to begin with. Among the moves Flair took were a backdrop on the floor, his flip into the buckles landing on the floor, and a bump off the top rope into the ring. Bobby Heenan made the brilliant remark early in the match saying that because of Hennig's strong legs that he didn't think Flair could make him submit to a figure 4. Guess that's why they call him the Brain. Because he once had one. Actually, in this case, all 3 announcers on this broadcast were far better than the show they were broadcasting, some of which is because of the absence of Dusty Rhodes and because Mike Tenay worked the entire show for the first time on a pay-per-view. Rhodes was clearly hurt from an ego standpoint about the change, which was more than a year overdue, as he spent much of the Saturday TV show the previous day complaining about the new announcers' assignments. Hennig worked the leg using a spinning toe hold and an Indian death lock. Hennig delivered hard chops to Flair, but Flair wasn't delivering hard chops back and seemed to be weak in his base from the leg the entire match. Flair brought in a chair and the belt. He crotched Hennig on the chair and put his leg between the chair and destroyed the leg in a great spot to set up the figure 4. Hennig grabbed the belt and hit Flair in the knee with it, then the head, and got the pin. Both left the ring selling their legs heavily. Flair didn't come out for the Battle Royal, and it was announced on television he'd be out of action for a few weeks. I'm not positive, but I believe it was all an angle, although it wasn't emphasized on television the next night strongly enough if it was an angle to lead to something, and if it was an angle, it was going to the well one time too often because Flair is coming off as the only thing that can kill him, because jobs can't kill him and bad booking can't kill him, but the idea that he's an old man breaking down in every match will kill him. 2.5 stars. 9. Scott Hall won the 59-man 3-ring Battle Royal in 29:48. The participants were Diamond Dallas Page, Ray Traylor, Right Disco, Mang Los Villanos 4 and V, Chris Benoit, David Finlay, Louisiana Parka, Regal, Public Enemy, Taylor Dragon, Norman Smiley, Luis Piccoli, Hector Garza, Liz Mark Jr. The Giant, Chris Adams, Greg Valentine, Nagata, Chris Jericho, Juventud Guerrera, Wrath, Harlem Heat, Steiners, Jim Duggan, Hugh Morris, Lex Luger, Miller, Brad Armstrong, Silver King, Prince Iaukea Mortis, Barbarian, Eddie Guerrero, Damian, Barry Darso, Dean Malenko, Vincent, John Noor, Kendall Windham, Dandy Mysterio Jr., Cyclope, still dressed up like Halloween, Michael Renegade, Chavo Guerrero Jr., Super Colo, Glacier, Bobby Blaze, Marcus Bagwell, Hennig, and Randy Savage. Flair wasn't in due to his injury, nor were Conan, herniated disc, tendonitis in the foot, Scott Norton, knee, and Kevin Nash, knee, although his participation in the match was heavily pushed in the promotion of the show, even though numerous sources in wrestling claimed he wouldn't be back in the ring until Starrcade. But he did participate in the finish. They changed the rules at the last minute. No longer did you have to go over the top rope as has been Battle Royal rules since the beginning of time, but now you are eliminated once your feet touch the floor so you could go out under the ropes, etc. I guess this was so some of the guys could get out of there without taking a bump. It was test pattern time for about 1925, although it wasn't as impossible to follow as the previous 2 years. It was probably less interesting, though. With all the new talent involved, not one received any remnant of a push or focus. The Mexicans were basically comedy figures, most eliminated immediately by Giant. The only newcomer to get a reaction was Duggan, who really doesn't qualify as a newcomer. Giant won ring 3, dropkicking Meng out, and he waited until the other rings cleared. When they all got into one ring, it was the entire NWO Hall, Bagwell, Savage, Hennig, and Vincent, against the WCW team of Page, Rick Steiner, Luger, Giant, and Booker T. Page hit the diamond cutter on Vincent, and Giant rolled him out of the ring under the ropes. Booker T, Steiner and Bagwell all went out, followed by Luger and Hennig tumbling out together. The original plan when the show was booked was for Luger to win, then it was changed to where Luger would be one of the final three, but apparently Page managed to talk his way into the final three spot. Savage came off the top rope but Giant caught him. Page gave him the diamond cutter but stopped Page from eliminating him. Giant then choke slammed Savage and rolled him out, leaving Hall, Page, and Giant. Hall got into the middle ring and pointed to the back, and the NWO music came, as the announcers expected. Nash. Guess the new Battle Royal rules, besides eliminations under the ropes now, are that the stars can come out after everyone else has been eliminated. Instead of Nash, it was Hogan who came out, and immediately slammed the Giant and began giving Page blows. Nash came down from the ceiling in Sting getup, and poor Tony Schiavone had to kill his credibility by actually trying to sell that this 6'10" guy was Sting. Hogan ran away from him, thus was eliminated from a match he was never in. Page was rolled out and Nash hit Giant with the bat and they got rid of him, leaving Hall as the winner. Nash then took the Sting mask off, revealing himself. After the match, Conan Norton, Eric Bischoff and the rest of the NWO joined for a celebration which included Hogan giving Page his own diamond cutter. 1/2 star. Going in with less hype and more exposure than ever before, the Extreme Championship Wrestling November to Remember pay-per-view on November 30th is the latest and the biggest test in the history of the 4-plus-year-old company. It will be the company's first pay-per-view event where the novelty factor will play only a minimal role. It is coming off what was generally, although not universally considered a poor effort on its second pay-per-view in August after a strong pay-per-view opener in April. It goes in with less mainstream national publicity due to virtually no presence in recent months on WWF programming. The first show was built around two strong storylines: the long-awaited Sabu vs. Taz match and Terry Funk's final campaign to become world champion, and publicized by several ECW appearances on WWF television. The second show came off generally positive momentum from the first show and a solid amount of WWF national hype due to the Tommy Dreamer vs. Jerry Lawler match. The national hype for the show is limited to one brief mention on the November 24th Raw, done in a manner that isn't going to sell even one order, and what is expected to be one or two video bumpers of ECW that will air during the WWF's weekend programming this week, which will be portrayed from a storyline standpoint as a paid ad, but is actually more of a favor. The lineup is built around Shane Douglas, the company's leading heel, attempting to win back the ECW title, playing the ultimate hometown babyface role in a show in Pittsburgh, actually the Golden Dome in Monaca, Pennsylvania, against Bam Bam Bigelow. That storyline itself suffered a minor fracture when the storyline person responsible for the double cross leading to the switch, Rick Rude, abruptly and with virtually no notice left both ECW and WWF for WCW less than 2 weeks before the show. In reality, the loss of Rude isn't going to mean one less pay-per-view buy. ECW's first two pay-per-view offerings were done with a limited pay-per-view universe of 15 to 17 million, since viewers' choice, about half the home satellite distributors and major conglomerates which are strong in ECW's home Northeast area opted not to carry the show. The universe will be considerably larger for this show, but still not at the level of WWF or WCW. Viewers' Choice will carry this show on its Hot Choice channel, which is a secondary channel to its VC1 Prime pay-per-view channel. This is available in about 60% of the total VC homes. In addition, neither Cablevision nor Time Warner Cable, both of which have its strongholds in the Northeast, have changed their policy in regard to carrying the event, largely due to a combination of the red flags and in some cases the misinterpretation of the ECW name vis-a-vis the now defunct but well-publicized Extreme Fighting Championships. Viewers' Choice Canada has also opted not to carry the show, and at the last minute Prime Star 24, a satellite dish company, has also pulled out. Locally, due to the strong promotional work by Douglas, who doubles as ECW's promoter in the Pittsburgh area, ECW is expecting to easily break its all-time company attendance record of 2,200, set in its previous appearance in the same building, and with several hundred tickets going for $100, the company all-time gate record of around $70,000 set at the first pay-per-view show in Philadelphia is also expected to be shattered. On paper, the lineup seems secondary to the company name itself and the idea that ECW is doing another pay-per-view show. None of the matches stand out on paper as being the caliber of the top matches on WWF or WCW shows. The match where Bigelow beat Douglas for the title in Queens, New York was short and had solid wrestling, and that combined with the expected hometown heat for Douglas should make it a good match, although if it was a memorable classic, it would have to be considered a big surprise. The four-way dance tag title match with the FBI, the Dudleys, Axl Rotten and Balls Mahoney and New Jack and John Kronus, now called the Gangstonators, was said to be a total mess in its dry run on November 21st in Poughkeepsie, New York, but no doubt this will be totally revamped from that match. Taz vs. Pitbull number 2 is expected to be a short squash, amidst rumors that Pitbull number 2 won't even appear as either way. The plan is for this to be the Pitbull's final match in ECW for a while. Sabu vs. Sandman has been made a tables and ladders match, so expect a combination of a lot of brutality and a lot of gimmicks. The remaining 3 matches are Tommy Dreamer vs. Rob Van Dam, with the winner getting to wave either an ECW or WWF flag around in the ring after the match, Chris Condito vs. Tommy Rogers, which is scheduled to open the show and actually should be the best wrestling match on the show, and Justin Credible vs. Mikey Whipwreck. The scheduled performance by Slash, the guitarist formerly with the band Guns N' Roses, most of whom legitimately are ECW fans, doing the national anthem fell through on November 24th. Porn star Jenna Jameson is scheduled to make a return, although that wasn't 100% at press time, as she's doing a movie that has had some problems and she may not be available. Still scheduled is the rap band and occasional indie wrestlers the Insane Clown Posse. Of all the new women's wrestling offices being created in Japan in the aftermath of the economic collapse of the All Japan Women's Office, it appears the most ambitious is going to be the Asian promotion headed by Hiroshi Rasi Ogawa, a key member of the AJW front office for years and booker Asia Kong. At a press conference on November 19, besides former AJW wrestlers Ri Tamata, Yumi Fukawa, and Mariko Yoshida, Ogawa said that his promotion would steal JWP champion Hikari Fukuoka and his best younger wrestler, Tomoko Kuzumi, and also take Mikiko Futagami and Micho Omukai from LLPW. Urgent also announced that it would set up a U.S. office and have Reggie Bennett run it and become the top foreign star for the group, and also use former AJW star Saki Hasegawa in the front office. Bennett had become a top star with AJW as a full-time regular until about 1 year ago, when she became the first casualty of the AJW economic woes. As the week went on, JWP President Masatoshi Yamamoto said that Fukuoka and Kuzumi would be staying with his group. JWP is now working closely with both LLPW and AJW, to the point that Yamamoto, in response to Ogawa's press conference, appeared at the AJW house show at Korakuen Hall on November 21 and announced that 2 groups would work together for a combined major house show in early 1998, and stated the 2 wrestlers wouldn't be leaving his group. However, Rumi Kazama, the LLPW president, admitted that Futagami and Omukai would be leaving her company for Urgent. Stanley Blackburn, a paternal-like figure to a generation of West Texas wrestlers and better known on a national basis for his role as figurehead president of the Old American Wrestling Association, passed away at about 3 a.m. on November 20th. He was 80. Blackburn in the Midwest during the 70s and early 80s was the predecessor for the older, good-hearted but somewhat bumbling figurehead president role that Jack Tunney made famous on a national basis during the glory years of the World Wrestling Federation in the mid to late 80s. In reality, Blackburn had a long association with pro wrestling, was a huge fan of pro wrestling, and was considered among the wrestlers who knew him as having a keen mind toward the business, to the point many would go to him for career advice. Most people in wrestling tell you what you want to hear, noted longtime friend Terry Funk, who consulted with Blackburn before making several of his biggest career decisions, including his 1985 move to the World Wrestling Federation, which was very controversial at the time due to the wrestling war and his family's long-name affiliation with the old NWA and All Japan Pro Wrestling. But he'd always tell you the truth. In the American Wrestling Alliance, Blackburn was always billed as a bank owner from Amarillo to give him the aura of prestige, who was bestowed by the mythical gods above as lifelong president of the American Wrestling Alliance. In that role, a few times per year, usually after a babyface had apparently won a title match, they'd bring Blackburn out and, while maintaining his own babyface persona, would explain the technicality reason, which sometimes made sense and often didn't, for the title to be returned to the heel champion. In the glory days of the American Wrestling Alliance, particularly in Minneapolis and Chicago, people like Blackburn, longtime promoter Wally Carbo, The Crusher, Baron Von Raschke, and Mad Dog Vachon became fixtures for so long they eventually gained a weird comedic cult status. In reality, Blackburn was part owner of the Blackburn Brothers Clothiers in Amarillo, and got involved in pro wrestling through the late Dory Funk Sr. in running the old West Texas territory, owning the promotion in Odessa and El Paso before eventually selling the latter city to Gory Guerrero. Vern Gagne was looking for someone who didn't live in the area and who could come across on television as dignified, and both he and Wally Carbo knew Blackburn, and he was president from the 60s through the mid-80s. People remembered him as a good-hearted type who would often sign notes on loans for area wrestlers, who would then default and Blackburn would be left paying the loan off. He was also remembered for when veteran wrestler Art Nelson died in Las Vegas broke, and Blackburn knew he always wanted to be buried back in Amarillo. Blackburn paid for bringing the body back, his funeral, and his cemetery plot. When you look up the term bait and switch in your dictionary, there should be a synonym to it: World Wrestling Federation. In a decision to forfeit potential pay-per-view money, the biggest revenue stream in the company, in favor of television ratings and probably short-term at that. The November 24th Live Raw from Fayetteville, North Carolina was built around Bret Hart. The same Bret Hart who wasn't there and, based on his own words, will never be there again. Nevertheless, the WWF had drawn two of its strongest ratings of the year, basically due to the wrestler the company has now tried to label as not being worth what they were paying him in the wake of the double-cross finish at the Survivor Series. There can be little doubt, based on the quarter hours and logic itself, that the first week's rating came from a combination of the curiosity over the finish the night before and a gift from WCW in making the Bret Hart announcement before Raw started, and even though WCW drew a better rating in the process, they also created curiosity as to what was going to be said on the WWF show later that night. Based on quarter hours, there is no question that the strength of the November 17th Raw rating was based on curiosity regarding the Vince McMahon interview about Bret Hart, an interview that the plan was originally done to put closure to the Bret Hart issue. Of course, it only fueled the fire among some, but more importantly, it became obvious that after trying a million hotshot ideas and failing almost every time, that the WWF has finally found something that can move the ratings. So, for the November 24th Raw, in newspapers around the country including USA Today, they listed the main event on that show as being Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. That was the hook. To make sure when the show started that people didn't wise up to the hook, they opened the show with Michaels doing an interview claiming he had a secret conversation with Hart, unbeknownst to everyone including McMahon, and using the term "as God is my witness," even using terms like internet and underground dirt sheet, and doing the interview out of character to make people believe he was shooting and not working in the new blurred environment the WWF is working under. He said that Hart was going to be there, and a white limo was shown several times for the remainder of the hour, with announcers Jim Ross and Jim Cornette trying for all they were worth to sell the idea that it was Hart in the limo. Of course, you all know the rest of the story. Instead of Hart, they dressed him up in a leather jacket and sunglasses and called him Hart, had Michaels put him in a sharpshooter and Helmsley stick the mic in his face where the Mini said that he submitted and that Michaels was the icon and the showstopper, put a WCW sign on his butt, kicked him in the butt out of the ring and said to go there with the rest of the garbage. Then WWF can hide behind the idea that it wasn't the company doing a bait and switch but Michaels, the heel, who was lying to the fans, which is what a heel should do. Granted, the humiliating a big star with a skit like that is a standard wrestling gag, but in the past it has always been done to set up a big grudge match. Usually when it is done otherwise to bury talent that has left, such as in the Billionaire Ted skits in 1996, it has backfired in the face of the promotion doing so. No doubt if this entire Hart-McMahon-Michaels thing had been an angle, it was the best one McMahon has done in years, and there would be tons of money to be made when the Hart-Michaels rematches were to take place. Only one problem. There are no rematches. The match they need to hype people for seeing is Michaels versus Ken Shamrock, and how did anything on that television show result in that feeling in your gut that you can't wait to see Shamrock beat Michaels? No, you wanted to see a match the company can't deliver. In this case, the skit was done with the idea of humiliating someone who has signed with the opposition, but if anything, it backfired, only making Hart even more of the focal point of the WWF than when he actually held the title. Whatever the company was theoretically trying to accomplish by doing the double cross in regard to the so-called protection of the company has been made far worse. The focal point of the company, a bigger deal to the company when he held the belt itself and now a bigger deal than the belt itself, is about to debut on their rival's television show. How much time did Michaels spend during the show talking about Ken Shamrock, his opponent on the next pay-per-view, the revenue stream where the big money is generated? How much time did the announcers spend hyping that and the other matches on the next pay-per-view? Let's face it. Aside from Slaughter vs. Triple H and Butterbean vs. Mero, can you name a match on that pay-per-view based on watching the television show? How much time was spent trying to humiliate Hart, Rick Rude, because he had left the company, and actually the skit with Harvey Whippleman playing Rude was hilarious, they dropped it at that point rather than try to run the same gag twice, and it being not funny and really pathetic the second time, and Jim Neidhart, because of fear he was going to leave the company and because it was another way where the WWF thought it could get under Bret Hart's skin. The show itself is weird enough, like watching the last years of the American Wrestling Alliance but with much super production values, where the emphasis is on burying the wrestlers who had left the company rather than building up what was left. The burials only made the wrestlers bigger and the promotion itself look like it was going down in those days, and it looks no different from the outside today. The legitimate bitterness the company appears to have toward Hart, which delivered another strong rating, appears to be taking it away from its job of promoting wrestling. And the weirdness of the attempts at other symbolism during the show, in particular Jeff Jarrett complaining about McMahon not fulfilling his contract to the letter, trying to create the idea to the fans that people who take Hart's side because of the valid point about not living up to contracts by the WWF are nothing but whining crybabies. as it was against the weakest Nitro show in a long time, but with the marquee Hogan vs. Giant title match on top. Nitro drew a 3.88 rating, 4.15 first hour, 3.66 seconds hour, and 5.82 share. Raw did a 3.05 rating, 2.80 first hour, 3.30 seconds hour, and 4.66 share. In the average of the 5 head-to-head segments, Nitro beat Raw 3.66 to 2.88. In the quarters head-to-head, WCW drew a 3.5 Iakia vs. Wright and Savage vs. Disco to WWF's 2.7, Rude spoof in Michaels' interview regarding Hart. WCW drew another 3.5, Malenko vs. Brad Armstrong, to WWF's 2.7, Blode losing tag titles to Gunn and Jams. WCW did another 3.5, McMichael interview and Bagwell vs. Jericho to WWF's 3.1, Goldust introduces Luna, lengthy Slaughter interview but probably the teasing of the limo and saying Hart was in the limo is more of what piqued the rating. WCW did a 3.8, Hennig vs. Trailer, to WWF's 2.7, Christopher vs. Flanagan, and finally WCW did a 4.0, Hogan vs. Giant, to WWF's 3.2, Bret Hart skit. The WCW peak was a 4.5 for Benoit vs. Sick Boy, and the rating inexplicably dropped to a 4.2 for the Zbyszko-Bischoff challenge before the top of the hour where the expected 9 p.m. drop took place. WWF peaked after Nitro went off the air with a 3.4 for Shamrock vs. Vega, and the rating held for the Maivia Austin Angle, Jarrett gimmick and the Kane run-in on Crush. The Nitro replay did a 1.82 rating and 3.70 share. As far as the Hart situation itself from a news value goes, it largely has run its course. During the week, Hart canceled scheduled interviews on the TSN show off the record due to Vince McMahon booking himself on the show the next day. McMahon then canceled as well. Hart canceled a Prodigy chat on advice from his lawyer since he is still under contract to WWF through the end of the month, and it was believed WWF has an exclusive deal with AOL, agreeing to do it the first week of December. However, the AOL exclusive must not be as exclusive as thought, since Jim Ross is going to do a chat on Prodigy after Hart to give the WWF side of things. Virtually every significant aspect of the story was covered the past 2 weeks in these pages, and there is little from an informational standpoint that can be added. Titan Sports has been strongly hinting that McMahon will pursue legal recourse, either criminal and/or civil, against Hart for decking him. The WWF is now saying McMahon suffered a broken ankle in the fracas along with the blurred vision and the black eye. Hart suffered a cracked bone in the hand a few inches up from the wrist and a few fractured knuckles, which are giving him a lot of pain, although at this point his hand hasn't been put in a cast. He was told by his doctors that he shouldn't train or wrestle for 6 weeks, although there are no plans for him to wrestle in WCW until January at the earliest, and his first major match could be on the WCW Super Brawl pay-per-view show. If one goes with the idea that Scott Hall, by winning the Battle Royal, will face Sting, and don't bet the mortgage on that yet because Hogan will play that one for all it's worth, in the title match, that leaves a Hogan vs. Hart match as a possibility for that show. As far as who is right and who is wrong, everyone has an opinion. Most of the facts in great detail are out there and readily available for those who want to know them. The general consensus has been decidedly pro-Hart. Based on a WWF hotline report, McMahon is very upset about the fan reaction and has already taped another interview which will likely air on the December 1st Raw addressing his feelings about the reaction, in which he'll likely attack, among others, the Canadian media, which has been sympathetic to Hart from the start. The reality is that the real world doesn't consist of black and white babyfaces and heels. Both have their sides. Because one is wrong doesn't make the other one right, or vice versa. If this was a simple issue, either double-crossing a guy in the ring for no logical reason, or a guy refusing to do a job or drop the belt in the ring while leaving for a new territory, maybe you could make a black and white distinction. Many attempting to use either point is the key to this story and use that point to say the other was the one in the right are using an argument that is emotional rather than logical. Simplifying what is a very complicated story into someone who refused to do a job or someone who changed a finish is missing most of the story. The portrayal of Hart as someone who refused to drop the belt in the ring, which is how McMahon has attempted to portray him both in his cryptic interview and to the rest of the WWF wrestlers and his front office as his reason for justifying to them what he did, is simply incorrect and totally misleading. The argument that the WWF needed to get the belt off Hart that weekend because of the WCW announcement on Nitro coming misses several points. My big question to that is simply, looking at the big picture, why? Of the two scenarios, can you logically say that the one McMahon picked, a Michaels vs. Shamrock main event made worse since the company decided to build itself around Bret Hart during the hype period, or a Final Four match as proposed and everyone had agreed to, using the fact Hart was leaving as part of the hype for the match, with the smart fans knowing the title would switch, but not knowing which of the other three was going to get it, was the one that would have drawn the most money. It could have been played out at the arenas all November, with Hart in the lame duck role having matches against Michaels, Shamrock, Undertaker, Vader, Austin and whomever else at different arenas, as fans would attend the house show knowing a title change was imminent, just not knowing when and to whom. The idea of seeing an arena title match where there was an actual possibility of a title change, particularly in a city like New York or Boston where the belt means more, would have done what for the gate in those cities. Fact is, if the lame duck deal was a killer to the company, the buy rate in Canada for Survivor Series, where it was mainstream news that Hart was leaving, by that logic should have been horrible, and the exact opposite was true. Fact is, any fan with the slightest access to inside knowledge knew before Survivor Series that Hart was going to WCW. Those who complain about the lame duck aspect of Hart as champion are forgetting the point that he already was before the match with Michaels. It wasn't an announcement by Bischoff that made him such. Among that group that knew, a decent percentage of fans in Canada and the insiders in the US, was the interest in Survivor Series heightened or lessened by that knowledge? The answer to that is obvious. A lame duck champion angle done correctly in this day and time would have been huge at the arenas at a time when business traditionally flourishes, and done well for the traditionally weak December pay-per-view show. A legitimate argument, one that has been expressed to me from those in Titan, is the fear that Hart would have shown up the next night on the Nitro in Memphis with the belt. McMahon could have taken the physical belt from him in the dressing room and told him he'd get it back when he showed up for TV the next night in Ottawa. I don't believe it was going to happen, but due to things that have occurred in the past and probably will in the future as well, he has a strong argument that there is justification for that fear. One could argue that he would still be under contract through November 30th, but by this point who is to say there wasn't a minor breach that could be used as a loophole? Lame duck scenarios have occurred in the past. In early 1992, Lex Luger, who had a valid long-term pro wrestling contract with WCW, along with Vince McMahon, found a loophole in that McMahon signed him to join the World Bodybuilding Federation, a McMahon company that wasn't a pro wrestling company, and thus wouldn't be violating the terms of his pro wrestling contract. Luger sat out the remainder of his WCW wrestling contract while being employed by the WBF, and then when the time limit of his WCW wrestling contract ended, he had his contract switched from the WBF to the WWF. He was a lame duck champion but had no problem doing the job for his best friend Sting on the way out, but wouldn't work any house shows or put anyone else over in the interim. If you accept the premise that it would have killed the WWF or the WWF belt had Bischoff made the announcement about Hart while he still had the belt, then yes, it was McMahon's last chance to get the belt back, and Hart had refused to put Michaels over on that night, or for that matter, before that night either. In this case, given the potential of the respective paths for business following the match, the path with Hart as champion until the last night in or the path where they are today, my feeling is that premise in this specific case holds absolutely no water. This path, doing a double cross and executing the double cross so pathetically that everyone knew, and making the guy you're trying to bury larger than life, and using his name as the focal point of television even though he's about to work for the opposition, did probably turn out to be the best one for television ratings, which if nothing else, shows just how strange a world pro wrestling has become. The Toronto Sun did a readers' poll in which 55% of the readers responding said they would be watching more WCW wrestling than WWF wrestling due to Bret Hart being with the group. 12% said they would watch more WWF wrestling than WCW. 8% said they would watch less pro wrestling overall. And 23% said they wouldn't change the amount of wrestling or the group they were watching due to Bret Hart leaving WWF. Keep in mind the wording of the questions, the time frame in which they were asked. Basically right after the double cross hit the news, and the nature of the people most likely to respond will skew things in the direction the poll turned out to be. I don't believe 55% of the wrestling fans in Toronto will now become more WCW fans than WWF fans due to Hart switching sides, but the poll does indicate Hart's name value in Toronto is exceedingly strong. In McMahon's defense, waiting until December 7th to take the title back was risky. You have a main eventer on a pay-per-view who would be already under contract and working for your main competitor. The timing was awfully precarious. Losing the title at MSG, or in Boston, or on the November 24th Raw, would have made sense because it would have eliminated the risk of relying on Eric Bischoff not to change his mind to screw with someone that he obviously gets great joy in screwing with. There are a lot of things that should have been handled differently, probably dating back many months, in letting the Michaels/Hart rivalry turned into dislike grow into unprofessional levels. If McMahon, for whatever reason, wanted out of the contract and was willing to breach it, he should have at least waited until he had created a scenario where Hart would drop the title to someone other than one person. For reasons good or bad is another issue, that dropping the title to would become a personal issue with. Whether Hart or Michaels were the one in the right in their personal problems over the past year plus, how could anyone have been so blind after what had already happened, and what was continuing to happen between the two to believe Hart wouldn't have a problem putting over a guy who had steadfastly refused to ever put him over? Even if you believe Hart was wrong in refusing to lose to Michaels on that night, the fact is McMahon should have known ahead of time it would be a problem because everyone halfway close to the situation knew. And with that knowledge, why did he go in that direction? The argument that Hart is an actor and should follow the script of the director misses the point about him being given reasonable creative control over his scenarios over his last 30 days of the contract. Supposedly all knew ahead of time and agreed to the script. It wasn't Hart who didn't follow the script. It was the director in the middle of a scene, right in front of the audience, changing a script out of fear, spite, desperation, wanting to show he could, or whatever series of reasons he had. An argument can be made Hart was unprofessional in refusing to lose to Michaels in Canada. But no argument can be made that McMahon wasn't unprofessional in the way he handled the situation in the ring that night. The ambiguous interpretation of the word reasonable is a key point in the argument. Was it reasonable for Hart to agree to drop the belt 1 week later rather than on a certain night? I'd agree it was unreasonable for him to refuse to drop it, period. I'd agree it was unreasonable for McMahon to ask him to drop it to Steve Lombardi, which McMahon never suggested, although Hart was apparently willing. Interpreting that Hart was within bounds of reasonable creative control by wanting to drop the title a week later instead of that night can't be used to justify anyone's behavior after the double cross. At that point, all reasonableness on both sides was long gone and what happened was very unfortunate. To this day, neither Hart nor McMahon are apologetic and you can see both would feel that they had wronged. Hart was clearly double-crossed and the company he worked been a top star for tried, in what will be a failed effort, to destroy his legacy, reputation and dignity for a situation that the company clearly started. McMahon was clearly punched in the temple very hard. Even if you think his behavior was so dishonest that he just got what he had coming, it still shouldn't have happened. If the WWF title is nothing more than a prop that shouldn't be taken seriously and Hart is such a mark for taking it seriously, missing the point that his exit to him was supposed to be the symbolic last scene of a 13-plus year long story and will always be the thing his wrestling career is most remembered for, and that, not the belt, is what McMahon really did steal from him, then so is McMahon going to the lengths he did to get it back. And so is this industry in reality. Because the double cross, a fixed ending of a match in a sport where every single ending of a match is fixed, became arguably the biggest news story of the year. And the fixed ending of a fixed match was a bigger part of the story than some very real major aspects in the same story. A real, not fixed, attempted breach of a contract. A real, not fixed, jump of one of the biggest names in the business. A real, not fixed, locker room assault. A real, not fixed, morale problem. A real, not fixed, problem with fan reaction that the company may be overreacting to. And a real, not fake situation where two of the biggest stars in the company went home and discussed over the incident. On television, the WWF portrayed Owen Hart as having severe mental strain due to the pressure of what happened, and he's on hiatus. In reality, he was on vacation in Disneyland. His contract is such that it is pretty much accepted across the board that against his wishes, he's going to return. His deal is believed to be so one-sided that if the WWF terminates him for failing to return to work, he still wouldn't be able to work anywhere else in wrestling for the next nearly 4 years. Davey Boy Smith is expected to have knee surgery later this week. On television, Michaels referred to it as the old fake knee injury deal, which he knows full well. This, among other things, will buy him time until he returns, although he also has been adamant in some circles about not wanting to return, although he doesn't appear to have much in the way of options either, as Titan has apparently made it clear it won't release either of them from their deals. Brett, Owen and Smith are all still receiving their weekly paychecks from the WWF, although there are other monies that supposedly the WWF is behind in paying Brett. Jim Neidhart was not under a WWF contract and could leave at any time. Unlike the other two, he's not someone who would be guaranteed a job with WCW should McMahon get rid of him. The belief is that the angle where he agreed to join DX, only to have them turn on him at the end, was a way to bury him in case he were to show up on WCW television the next week, although it also buried him when it comes to real future value in WWF as well, and at the same time, continue to send a message back to Calgary about who is really in, or not in, control. Neidhart could have refused the angle and lost his job, but there are no guarantees WCW would take him. Had he lost his job under those circumstances, WCW probably would have taken him, but for a 42-year-old wrestler who is lucky to be in the mainstream, a job in the hand is far more valuable than one that might not be there. Whatever people were clinging to, the argument that this whole scenario from start to finish was the most well-orchestrated scam in wrestling history ended on November 24th. If it had been a scam, Everything was teased for Hart's returning Big Pop to show up and confront Michaels. But he was in Calgary, not Fayetteville. And was still in Calgary on November 25, which was the last television taping by the WWF before his contract expires on November 30. Eventually, this reality will turn into a pro wrestling angle if or when Owen Hart returns, perhaps with Smith, and goes for revenge against Michaels, and perhaps Helmsley. It wouldn't even surprise me for McMahon to try and use the negative reaction to himself and do a heel turn himself. And the fact this caused so much commotion, I'd say it's a lock that companies for years will try copycat scenarios, which will be complete works. Puerto Rico. The next big event will be on Thanksgiving night billed as Invasion Azteca with wrestlers from the Promo Azteca office coming in. Don't know the city, but the card will be Ray Gonzalez defending the Universal title against Razor Ramon, Rick Bogner, Carlos Colon vs. Dutch Mantle, El Profe vs. Rico Suave in a tuxedo match, Invader No. 1 vs. Pierroth Jr., La Parca vs. Huracan Jesus Castillo Jr. That's an interesting match because technically that puts a WCW wrestler against a WWF wrestler. Ricky Santana defending the Puerto Rican title against Villano 3, Mascara Sagrada and Tinieblas Jr. versus the Canadian Glamour Boys, Shane and Sean, the latter being Sean Morley, who also works for Azteca and All Japan, and Lightning Kid, Northeast indie wrestler Steve Corino, whose ring outfit looks like Sean Waltman's when he worked as Lightning Kid, defending the WWC lightweight title against Jerry Estrada. They are billed Ramon as a former WWF Intercontinental Champion, which is true for the Razor Ramon played by Scott Hall, but not this one. There was an article in the November 15 El Vocero newspaper on prelim wrestler Black Ninja, real name Luis Rios Rodriguez, 39, who was accused of raping his 14-year-old stepdaughter and sent to prison. The events allegedly took place during September. Rios was arrested and held on $60,000 bail, and as of the last reports was still in prison after being unable to raise bail money. EMLL is running another Japan tour from December 10 to December 17, with the biggest shows being December 10 at Hakata Star Lanes, December 14 in Osaka and December 17 at Korakuen Hall. In Hakata, the main event will be Mr. Niebla and Mr. Aguila vs. Black Warrior and Rey Bucanero plus Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. vs. Cien Caras and Emilio Charles Jr. In Osaka. It'll be Atlantis and Niebla and El Bronco vs. Charles and Warrior and Bucanero and Rayo vs. Apollo Dantes. At Korakuen Hall it'll be Niebla and Aguila and Bronco vs. Bucanero and Scorpio Jr. and Warrior. Also on the tour will be La Fiera, Guerrero de la Muerte, Shinobi, Ringo Mendoza, Tony Rivera, Violencia, and Karloff Lagarde Jr. Promo Azteca ran November 14 in Tijuana with the Headhunters vs. La Parca and Psicosis main event. Psicosis turned on Parca and then Conan, who didn't work the card due to his injury, did a run-in to save Parca and I guess turned back face in the market after the crowd misinterpreted a scenario booked as every man for himself as being a heel turn on Santo. Triple A returned to Tijuana on November 21. Don't have details but know that Pero Aguayo and Pero Aguayo Jr. vs. Sangre Chicana and Picudo and Vampiro Canadiense and Octagon vs. Cibernetico and Fuerza Guerrera were the top two matches on the show, which shows just how bad Triple A has gotten. All Japan. Tag Team Tournament standings as of the matches on November 25, 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw, 1. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama 4-0-1 9 points, 2. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao 5-1 10 points, 3. Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace 4-1 8 points, 4. Steve Williams and Gary Albright 4-1-1 9 points, 5. Johnny Smith and Wolf Holyfield 2-2-2 6 points, 5. Stan Hansen and Bobby Duncombe Jr. 3-4 6 points, 7. Barry Windham and Justin Bradshaw 2-5 4 points, 8. Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki 1-3 2 points, 9. Tamon Honda and Takao Omori 1-4, 2 points, 10. Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida 1-6, 2 points. Tournament ends on December 5 with every team ending up having 9 matches. The Misawa and Akiyama vs. Kawada and Tao match will be on November 28 in Sapporo. November 19 in Kochi before 2,800 fans saw Blackjacks beat Hayabusa and Shinzaki in 15:04. Hansen and Duncombe beat Omori and Honda in 12:41 when Hansen pinned Honda with a lariat, and Kawada and Tao beat Kimala and Izumida in 10:02 when Kawada pinned Izumida with a jumping high kick. November 20 in Kobe before 3,100 saw Smith and Wolf beat Blackjacks when Smith pinned Bradshaw, Hansen and Duncombe beat Hayabusa and Shinzaki when Hansen pinned Hayabusa after a lariat in 15:24 and in a major result, Williams and Albright beat Kawada and Tao in 10:54. November 21 in Fuji before a sellout 2,850 saw Smith and Wolf beat Duncombe and Hansen when Wolf pinned Duncombe, Kobashi and Ace beat Izumida and Kimura when Kobashi pinned Izumida with a lariat in 10:41 and Kawada and Tao beat Honda and Omori in 12:45. November 23 in Sendai drew 3,900 as Albright and Williams beat Blackjacks when Williams pinned Wyndham in 12:35. Kawada and Tao beat Shinzaki and Hayabusa when Kawada pinned Shinzaki in 18:09, and in a major result, Misawa and Akiyama beat Kobashi and Ace in 29:50. Matches have a 30-minute time limit, when Misawa pinned Ace after a Tiger driver. November 24 in Hachinahe drew 2,400 as Duncombe and Hansen beat Izumida and Kimura 2 when Duncombe pinned Izumida in 12:32. Kobashi and Ace beat Honda and Omori in 15:40 when Kobashi pinned Omori, and Kawada and Tao beat Smith and Wolf in 12:44 when Kawada pinned Smith after a power bomb. One note from this show was in the main event, which was a six-man with Williams and Albright and Bradshaw beating Misawa and Akiyama and Satoru Asako, is that Bradshaw got the score the pin over Asako using a choke slam as his finisher. This seems to indicate All Japan has liked Bradshaw to this point to let him, rather than a full-timer, get a winning pinfall in a main event match. This may also have been political since they've taken a lot of the falls in the tag matches on him. November 25 in Aomori before 2,350 saw Omori and Honda beat Blackjacks when Omori pinned Bradshaw in 15:43 after a knee drop off the top rope. Williams and Albright beat Izumida and Kimura 2 when Albright made Kimura submit to the armbreaker in 15:44, and Misawa and Akiyama beat Hansen and Duncombe when Misawa pinned Duncombe after the spinning elbow in 13:52. The Wolf Holyfield deal by Jim Roche, formerly known as the Lacrosse, saw him unmask in the ring before the matches began on opening night. They are pushing really hard a new All Japan video game, and one of the characters is called Wolf Holyfield in the game, who is a bodybuilder with face paint, and Lacrosse came the closest to fitting the bill. November 9 TV drew only a 1.2 rating. New Japan. The remaining 3 matches for the January 4 Tokyo Dome show were announced on November 25, and the show looks even more depressing afterwards. As expected, the 2 announced matches were Kensuke Sasaki defending the IWGP Heavyweight title against Keiji Muto, and a battle of the bosses with NWO's Masahiro Chono against Hai's Shiro Koshinaka in his first match back after surgery. The other match, which was a real letdown, is Shinya Hashimoto vs. Dennis Lane, who is a no-name kickboxer from the United States whose main claim to fame in Japan is once losing a K1 match to Masaaki Sadake. This is the equivalent of using Butterbean but without Butterbean's pseudo-celebrity status to at least give it name value. Tag Team Tournament standings as of November 25. The system here is simply based on the number of wins. 1. Keiji Muto and Masahiro Chono 3-0. 2. Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuo Yamazaki 2-0. 3. NWO Sting and Hiroyoshi Tenzan 2-2. 3. High Voltage 2-2. 5. Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura 1-1. 5. Shinya Hashimoto and Manabu Nakanishi 1-1. 7. Tadao Yasuda and Satoshi Kojima 1-3, 8. Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara 0-3. In this tourney, all the teams have 7 matches and the top 2 point getters meet in the championship match on December 8 in Osaka. Chono and Muto spray painted the IWGP tag title belts black and are calling them the NWO tag team titles. Tourney opened on November 18 and had Tano before 1,850 with Muto and Chono beating High Dosage in 13:21 and Sasaki and Yamazaki beating Yasuda and Kojima in 12:54. November 19 and Koga before 1,600 had Fujinami and Kimura over Tenzan and Sting in 9:48. November 20 in Kimitsu before 1,350 had Nakanishi and Hashimoto beat Goto and Ohara. November 21 in Tokyo at Mecha Akishima before a sellout 2,700 saw Voltage over Ohara and Goto in 9:23 and Sasaki and Yamazaki beating Sting and Tenzan in 11:34. November 22 in Nagooka before a sellout 2,700 had Sting and Tenzan over Yasuda and Kojima in 12:02 and Muto and Chono over Fujinami and Kimura in 13:26. They did an angle during the main event where Goto and Ohara hit the ring and attacked fellow NWO members Muto and Chono, doing a combination choke slam, Ohara's finisher, and back suplex, Goto's finisher, on both Muto and Chono to build up the match the next night at Korakuen Hall. November 23 at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,118 saw Voltage beat Yasuda and Kojima and Muto and Chono win the grudge over Ohara and Goto. November 24 at Korakuen Hall saw Sting and Tenzan beat Voltage in 9:17 and Kojima, and Yasuda beat Hashimoto and Nakanishi when Yasuda pinned Nakanishi in 14:51. November 3 TV drew a 6.7 rating, which was the Fukuoka Dome show headlined by Choshu vs. Sasaki. Other Japan notes. The Rings Battle Dimension tournament continued on November 20th in Osaka at Chuo Gymnasium before 5,110 fans with the quarterfinals. In the lone upset, Ilukine Mikhail beat Tsuyoshi Kosaka with a heel hook in 14-16, while Akira Maeda beat Mitsuya Nagai in 17 minutes with a choke. Full Khan beat Dick Frey in 7-15 with a choke, and Kiyoshi Tamura beat Joop Kasteel in 6:30 with a heel hook. This sets up the semi-finals on December 23rd in Fukuoka as Maeda vs Tamura and Frey vs Mikhail. However, Maeda appeared to blow out his chronically bad left knee in the Nagai match, and we don't have any word on what his situation will be in regards to December 23rd. Han vs Mikhail will be probably the first meeting between teacher and student. The winners meet on January 21st at Budokan Hall in Ring's traditional biggest show of the year. Maeda vs Tamura is also interesting in that Maeda won their previous meeting, and this may be Tamura's last chance to get a win from the soon-to-be retiring Maeda. With Maeda retiring, he may give himself one last tourney victory similar to the exceedingly successful gimmick Riki Choshu did in 1996. The promotion has been putting Tamura in the main event slot on every show, even though Maeda is still the big drawing card, a trend that continued this past week even though Tamura's opponent was a guy who has largely been pushed as a large muscular prelim guy. Kyoko Inoue held a press conference on November 25th announcing officially what everyone pretty much has known, that she is starting a new women's promotion called New Japan Women's Pro Wrestling Corporation. Koki Sugimoto, a longtime writer for Gong magazine who just resigned this week, will be running the business end of things, and their first show will be January 9th at Korakuen Hall. All Japan Women held a major show on November 23rd in Nagoya before a crowd announced at 3,850 in Aichi Gym. Yumiko Hata retained her WWWA title in the main event, beating Manami Toyota in 23-17 with the Pyramid Driver. After the match, Hata challenged LLPW's Shinobu Kondori to a title match. It appears that AJW, JWP and LLPW are going to work together to combat the aggressive version group. Also on the card, Great Sasuke and Super Delphin beat Tiger Mask and now Hiro Hoshikawa. Takako Inoue retained the All-Pacific title, beating Kumiko Makawa in 1803 with a knee-lock submission, and in a match to determine the vacant Japanese tag team champions, Momoe Nakanishi and Nani Takahashi beat Emi Motokawa and Sari Azumi to capture the belts. In regard to the November 17th issue and the subject of famous double crosses, apparently Japan has its own wrestling history of double crosses. With the exception of Takata Burbick and Scott Waring, we really didn't get into them. Not sure of the details, but apparently the most famous and some would say the most significant double cross in pro wrestling history was in a 1954 match between Riki Dozen and Masahiko Kimura. A more modern and exceedingly brutal one was in a match with Nobuhiko Takada vs Koji Kiao. Kiao was offered a $75,000 payoff to have a match with Takada, but at the last minute, refused to do the job. They must have worked out some sort of a finish ahead of time, and were working a match as planned. At one point, when Kiao left himself open, Takada unleashed probably the greatest kick ever delivered within the framework of worked pro wrestling. Maeda Choshu had nothing on that kick, and knocked Kiao flat out for real, so Kiao ended up doing the job. There was also a famous incident with Kiao and John Tenta. Tenta, who had a rep in pro wrestling as being one of the toughest guys, wasn't selling for Kiao, and the match fell apart immediately. It turned into one of those standoffs with both guys backing off and threatening at the same time before it was broken up. At that point, Kiao grabbed the ring mic and began talking about how pro wrestling was all fake, at which time the promotion pulled the juice from the mic. Judging from magazine photos, it appears the result of the November 3rd Kingdom main event was Masahito Kakihara beating Patrick Smith and not the other way around, as were the reports we received. Kingdom ran on November 19th in Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center, drawing an announced 2,612 with Hiromitsu Kanehara going over Smith in the main event. Kingdom's next shows are December 2nd in Hakata Star Lanes, Kanehara vs Kazushi Sakuraba, Yui Sano vs Smith, December 8th in Kagoshima, Kanehara vs Sakuraba and Smith vs Kenichi Yamamoto, and December 14th in Tokyo at Yoyogi Gym, Kanehara vs Valid Ismail and Sakuraba vs Paul Herrera. Kanehara vs Ismail will almost certainly be a shoot, while Sakuraba vs Herrera, a former UFC fighter who is a member of Tank Abbott's gang, may be as well. The December 14th show will actually be a pay-per-view in Japan, so hopefully we can detail it. DirecTV, which debuts in the Japanese market on December 1st, is using this event as a promotional tool as a pay-per-view, but since the number of addressable homes is so few, it's not like there is any money to be made at this point. Kingdom's ring style can almost be described as worked UFC-type matches. The style itself makes for more exciting matches, at least when the Japanese are involved, as some of the matches with Americans who don't understand the style and have never worked before look pretty bad, then rings or pancrase. But the lack of interesting matchmaking and big marquee name fighters seems to have this promotion doomed to be a non-factor in the big picture. Gio ran Korakuen Hall on November 18 before about 1,500 with Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda over Chigusa Nagao and Sakura Hirota on top. War is holding a tournament, an internal J1 heavyweight title tournament, with the winner getting the original belt worn by Riki Dozan as Japanese heavyweight champion in the mid-50s. It's a single elimination deal. On November 18 in Nagoya, Koki Kitahara beat Arashi. November 21 in Kobe saw Nobutaka Araya beating Nobukazu Hirai, and November 24 in Yokohama saw Genichiro Tenryu beat the lone outsider in the tourney, Yoshiaki Fujiwara. Koji Kiao has apparently been hospitalized due to injuries but was left the hospital to sit ringside to scout, since the Tenryu vs Kiao in a tournament match will take place on December 24. In FMW, Atsushi Onita and Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Haido retained the six-man street fight belts, beating Hiramichi Fuyuki and Geto and Jado on November 24 in Inan, when the imposter great Nita, Hideki Hasaka, blew the mist in Geto's eyes, leading to the win. In something of a surprise on November 20, Onita did a clean job in a six-man non-title match with Kuroda and Haido against Riki Fuji and Mr. Pogo 2 and Masato Tanaka, when Tanaka pinned him. FMW debuts the ECW gimmick of the three-way dance, billed as much as opposed to triple threat or triangle match, on December 13 in Kawasaki with Pogo and Fuji, Geto and Jado and Mr. Ganasuke and Yukihiro Kanimura. Minoru Suzuki returns to Pancrase after his latest injury on January 16 at Korakuen Hall. Pancrase has yet to announce a lineup for December 20 other than Yuki Kondo defending the title against Masakatsu Funaki and John Lober vs. Rishi Yanagisawa. Voss Rudin, the biggest foreign star left in the promotion, announced that due to a myriad of injuries said that he would be out of action for the next 5 months. Yoshiki Takahashi suffered a broken nose in his match with Kondo on the November 16 Kobe show. Talk about running a building too much. Here is a listing of pro wrestling dates at Korakuen Hall between December 17 and January 23, December 17 EMLL, December 21 All Japan Women Tag Team Tournament Finals, December 22 FMW, December 23 Umanosuke Ueda Benefit Show involving 13 promotions, December 24 War with Tenryu vs Kiao, December 26 JWP, December 27 GIA, December 18 JD, January 2 All Japan Noon, and Big Japan Eve, January 3 All Japan Noon, and AJW Eve, January 4 AJW Noon, plus the New Japan Tokyo Dome show takes place at 3 p.m. that day, and the Dome is next door to Korakuen Hall, January 6 FMW, January 7 FMW, Azen, January 9 Kyoko Inoue's New Japan Women Group's debut show, January 11 JD, January 15 GIA, January 16 Pancrase, January 18 All Japan Noon and New Tokyo Pro Wrestling, Eve, January 20th Battle Arts, and January 23 All Japan, a special card since it will be Baba's 60th birthday. Here and there. Mark Selker dropped his lawsuit against Jerry Lawler and Larry Burton on November 14. No reason was given for dropping the suit. There wasn't much left to win anyway. The most valuable assets the company had were the syndicated clearances, which are long gone, and the WMC TV slot, which is also gone. So to win control, you have the rights to run a promotion with no television in markets where there is now one or two opposition groups in most cities, that were all big money losers to begin with, and you can inherit the past due bills in several of the markets to arenas and television stations just to restart under the USWA name. The HBO show Inside the NFL had a feature this past week on Ernie Ladd, who was a star in the old AFL before quitting at his peak and going into pro wrestling, where he was one of the top heels in the country during the 70s. They focused heavily on his pro wrestling in the feature and called him the first black athlete in major pro sports to hold out for more money at a time when doing so was considered almost blasphemous in sports. RF Video at P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19053 has videotapes of just about anything and everything that is available throughout the world, whether it be pro wrestling, shoot fighting, Vale Tudo, or even K1 from around the world. They also have insider shoot interviews with many of the ECW wrestlers, including a recent 2-tape 8-hour-long interview with Shane Douglas and Francine for $30. The tapes consist of answering some inside and controversial questions and tons of match footage and wrestling interviews edited in. Global Wrestling on December 7th in Lima, Ohio has Al Snow vs. Elvis Elliott on top. For more info you can call 419-224-0037, and if you mention The Observer, you get $1 off any ticket. The Washington Post ran a story by Linton Weeks about pro wrestling on the internet. The writer mentioned that he grew up in Memphis in the early 60s and his Sunday school teacher was Lance Russell. What a dichotomy Russell's life must have been in those days. He was a top TV program director in Memphis during the week, did the pro wrestling on Saturday and taught Sunday school. Speaking of Larry Burton, he phoned in Matt Bourne's radio show in Portland on November 15. Naturally, the big topic of conversation was the Bret Hart situation, with most sympathetic to Hart. Burton called up and said that the callers were all idiots. He said McMahon was a great guy and that the incident never took place because McMahon would never get into a fist fight with anyone, and said that you can't believe anything you see on the internet. Bourne then chimed in about all the internet reports of his death. Burton said that McMahon and Hart are still best of friends. Peggy Gilbert, the mother of the late Eddie Gilbert, is attempting to maintain an Eddie Gilbert Memorial Scholarship Fund at Lexington High School in Tennessee. They have been presenting a scholarship in Eddie's name to a member of the graduating class during graduation week. For information or donations, you can write to Eddie Gilbert Memorial Scholarship Fund, P.O. Box 472, Lexington, Tennessee 38351. Big Time Wrestling will be running on December 13th at Logan High School in Union City, California, with Greg Valentine vs. Shane Cody and Buddy Rose vs. Johnny Starr plus Reggie Bennett on the undercard. NHB. In probably the biggest coup in a long time, Nippon Television, CH4 in Tokyo, the same station that has carried All Japan Pro Wrestling since the early 70s, has signed to carry the Ultimate Japan show. The card will air on a tape delay on December 21st from 1:15 a.m. to 2:40 a.m. and serve as the lead-in for the All Japan Pro Wrestling show that night. This will mark the first time a UFC show will be airing on network television, so the total audience watching this show will be the largest to date. A successful event with a network audience, albeit limited due to it airing past midnight, or a successful showing by any of the fighters, would become a lot bigger boost in the Japan market. Just a flop show would, with greater exposure, be more of a killer. With just a few weeks before the Ultimate Japan show, the lineup for the card is remaining sketchy. Semaphore Entertainment Group had discussions with the WWF about trying to use a wrestler that could do a UFC match and would also mean something in Japan, as a draw. The first person talked about was obviously Ken Shamrock, and Semaphore Entertainment Group made a huge offer for him. Because of WWF's plans for Shamrock, they didn't want to risk him in that type of a situation, and both sides were in negotiations regarding another wrestler. But ultimately WWF decided against it due to the injury risk with such a depleted roster at present when it came to talent depth. As things stand right now, Maurice Smith vs. Randy Couture is the main event. Mark Kerr looks to be off the show and is still talking like he's going to do the Pride show, although Semaphore Entertainment Group is going to court to try and prevent that from taking place. The Kerr situation for the January 21st show is weird in and of itself. Some sources in NHB were calling the Pride press conference almost a double cross on a very minor scale of the Bret Hart deal. Both Kerr and presumably Hoist Gracie were going to Japan expecting Pride to announce them against one another in the main event, but instead at the press conference, the promoters announced both would be on the show against different but unnamed opponents. UFC had slated for a Gary Goodridge vs. Vitor Belfort match, however Goodridge pulled out this week because his foot injury suffered in the Tokyo Dome match against Oleg Toktarov was slow in responding. Kevin Jackson vs. either Frank Shamrock or Enson Inoue remains on the schedule, plus a 4-man heavyweight tournament. The plan right now is for a Tank Abbott vs. Yoji Anjo first-round match, and Marcus Conan Silveira against another slot that needs to be filled. It has been hard to get named Japanese fighters because Rings has a show on December 23rd and Pancrase has a show on December 20th. Guy Mesder isn't booked on the Pancrase show that month, so they may bring him back. Mark Coleman has been telling people he thinks he'll be able to return from knee surgery in time for the March pay-per-view show. There was a tournament in Tel Aviv, Israel on November 15th, won by Russian Igor Vovchanchin, beating American amateur wrestler Nick Nutter in the finals. Vovchanchin upped his record to 19-1 with the win, with his only loss coming at the hands of Rings wrestler Alukhine Mikhail. Randy Couture a few weeks back came out on top of the Tough Sunkiss tournament, a national tournament, winning the Greco-Roman division in the 214-pound weight class. The November 30th Vale Tudo event in Sao Paulo, Brazil was moved to December 10th because Walid Ismail, who faces Joel de Oliveira in the main event, suffered a minor foot injury in training. Pro wrestlers Geza Kallman Jr. and Joe DeForia will both be competing in an NHB event on December 6th in Woodridge, Virginia. ECW. A dry run of several of the pay-per-view matches took place on November 21st in Poughkeepsie, New York before 1,200 fans. The results weren't promising from the reports we received. Tommy Dreamer and Rob Van Dam did a long match described as being not good at all. Sabu vs. Sandman was said to not be good either, although their pay-per-view match with all the tables and ladders gimmicks should be wilder than they're trying a regular match. The dry run four-way dance with the FBI, Dudleys, Gangstonators and Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney was said to be horrible, but that match will also likely be totally different from what they did in Poughkeepsie. The other matchup that'll be on the pay-per-view that was on the show, Justin Credible vs. Mikey Whipwreck was said to have been a decent match. They taped television on November 20th in Queens, New York in front of a regular sellout crowd of 900. Tommy Rogers beat Chris Chetty in the opener. People are raving about Rogers' finishing move. Credible and Jason beat Whipwreck and Spike Dudley. Chris Condito beat Jerry Lynn. Taz beat Bubba Ray Dudley. After the match, D-Von and Big Dick attacked Taz. Rotten and Mahoney came out to attack the Dudleys with chairs. FBI kept the tag titles, beating Axel and Balls in a match where Dudleys and Gang Stanitos showed up, and they did a four-way brawl. Fans were chanting "You sold out" at New Jack due to the internet rumor he was going to WCW. New Jack claimed that he was given an offer from WCW but had turned it down. WCW claims he was never given an offer to begin with. Either way, he isn't going. I don't even want to speculate on what the truth is because one would think WCW wouldn't want him, but at the same time, Eric Bischoff did have a contract discussion with Taz and denied it later. Anyway, New Jack overreacted to a chant which I'm told actually came from very few fans and grabbed the house mic and cut a promo on them about how he dove off balconies for ECW fans and now they call him a sellout, and was almost in tears in the ring and even backstage. At this point it was described that the show fell apart when a woman in the audience listened to the crowd's prompting and showed her tits. She became the center of attention. Paul Heyman got in the ring to run her down and the problem went on for too long and killed the heat for the rest of the show. Tommy Dreamer beat Paul Diamond. Main event saw Bam Bam Bigelow over Sabu via DQ with Rob Van Dam, Dreamer, and Sandman all getting involved. According to Paul Heyman, he only received word about Rick Rude showing up on Nitro 1 hour before the show, and that the WWF didn't know about it until 5 minutes before the show went on the air. Rude had a lawsuit pending against both WCW and against Sting personally for negligence in his career-ending back and neck injuries. There was a lot of personal heat between Sting and Rude over how Sting's deposition in the case went. With the contract with WCW, Rude settled the lawsuit. ECW will be using Titan's lighting advisor for the pay-per-view show, so make sure there isn't a repeat. There had been some kind of an unofficial agreement between WWF and ECW that WWF would help publicize the pay-per-view show. Originally, Paul Heyman was supposed to shoot a tape segment for Raw, but he never sent the tape for either the November 10th or November 17th shows because they were going to be so dominated by the Bret Hart situation, and he felt anything about his company would be so secondary that from a positioning standpoint it would be buried. Heyman offered WWF a Sandman and Dreamer vs. Sabu and Van Dam tables and ladders match for the November 24th Raw in Fayetteville, which the WWF turned down. He did send 2 quick bumpers to the November 24th show, however they didn't air, and the show was only mentioned once in passing by Jim Ross, and then Jim Cornette basically ran it down. They did mention ECW had bought ads which would be seen on the weekend programming. Heyman had an explanation as to Tommy Dreamer working while his heel isn't ready, saying that Dreamer is working without using pain-killing drugs to get through his matches and cope with the pain afterwards, and that the cast is made of iron so there is no way he can do anything in the ring to injure it worse. The local Philadelphia Jewish Exponent newspaper ran an article on a boxing exhibition between Sandman and Philadelphia boxer Damon Feldman. It was supposed to be a charity exhibition, but Feldman hit Sandman with a left hook that the paper reported turned Sandman into jello about 1 minute into the exhibition. The boxer versus wrestler exhibition went to the Louis Shoto Fund, a 16-year-old local high school wrestler who suffered an injury while wrestling to his neck that left him a quadriplegic. Feldman claimed he carried Sandman after the first round, but it turned into a fiasco ending in the third round when Sandman tried to use the cane as a gimmick. When Sandman showed up later that night for his scheduled pro wrestling match, he was noticeably marked from the boxing exhibition. WCW. Nitro on November 24th in Saginaw, Michigan drew a sellout 5,879, 5,076 paying $111,510. It was the most boring Nitro in a long time. The NWO came out in the open. They brought out a fan sign that said Bischoff owns Vince, which several of the wrestlers were laughing about, most notably Conan and Hogan. Hogan challenged anyone backstage to a title match. Giant agreed. J.J. Dillon said he wouldn't allow it because Giant had a broken hand, but Giant said he'd sign a deal indemnifying WCW for any injuries. Explain now why Giant was wrestling the previous night in the Battle Royal. Steiner's beat Disorderly Conduct of former Texas Hangman tag team Sans Masks in 340 when Rick pinned Tom after a sky-high bulldog in a bad match. Booker T rolled up Meng in 256. After the match, Meng laid out both T and Stevie Ray with the death grip. It appears they are going to do a Heat vs. Faces of Fear match at Starrcade. With all the talent they have, why do they book matches like that on PPVs? J.J. Dillon did an interview and basically they said Raven had signed a contract, but that he's still going to get to sit in the audience and his matches will still be no DQ matches. Chris Benoit beat Sick Boy with the crossface in 3:36. For a rookie, Sick Boy looked good. Didn't hurt that Benoit can make almost anyone look bad. It does hurt that it appears Benoit is going to be mired in another second match feud against Raven's Nest. Benoit was cleaning house of everyone until Saturn hit him with the TV belt and put him in his rings of Saturn submission. Larry Zbyszko did an interview challenging Scott Hall. Bischoff came out and ripped on Zbyszko with some shoot comments about how when Larry was a wrestler, he really wasn't that good, particularly by today's standards. Zbyszko then challenged Bischoff, and I believe they're going to wrestle at Starrcade. We should take a poll on who you expect to have the better pay-per-view match, Bischoff or Butterbean. Prince Iaukea pinned Alex Wright in 3:16 with a crossbody when Deborah McMichael accidentally distracted Wright. Wright then fired McMichael. That one lasted long enough, didn't it? Iaukea looked a lot better in the ring, although fans still don't take him seriously. Randy Savage destroyed Disco Inferno in 2:16, beat up ref Mickey J and spray-painted Disco after the match. Dean Malenko beat Brad Armstrong with a cloverleaf in 5:27. The work was solid, but nobody cared. Steve McMichael did an interview and Deborah came out and begged Steve to take her back. Steve turned her down, but Deborah said she'd do anything, and she meant anything, to get him back. Marcus Bagwell beat Chris Jericho with the blockbuster in 6:58 of a decent match. Ray Traylor beat Kurt Hennig via DQ in 6:31 of a U.S. title match when the entire NWO interfered. They wanted to write NWO in magic marker on his forehead, but the magic marker wouldn't write. The wonders of live television. Match was real bad. Then Giant beat Hogan via DQ in a title match in 4:33 when Giant used the choke slam and the entire NWO came out. Nash was dressed as Sting and hit Giant with the bat for the DQ. Same exact scenario seen way too often, and it was actually dull by this point, and the crowd wasn't into it like in the past either. The entire NWO destroyed the Giant. A dummy dressed as Sting was dropped from the ceiling and fell through the ring. That must have been fun to wrestle on if it was gimmicked that bad, and Nash hit the dummy's head several times with a baseball bat. Bischoff and Rick Rude came out and announced the final match, and Bischoff teased it was a preview of the future. Obviously he didn't listen to Rude's audition tapes at ECW. They were awful together, which doesn't bode well for the future if plans aren't changed. There's something about a heel being the lead announcer that just doesn't work. They work as a sidekick antagonist, but it wasn't even annoying this time, just bad. With the arrival of the Thursday show on TBS in January, the Saturday morning main event and Sunday pro shows will be dropped. The Sunday show for the most part had died in the ratings once it was moved away from its traditional 6:05 p.m. time slot up 1 hour. The fact that absolutely nothing of value ever happens on either show also made them shows that there was no reason to watch during a period when so much WCW wrestling is on every week. TBS will remain with 4 hours per week, the 2 hours on Saturday night and 2 live hours on Thursday nights. Flair signed a 3-year contract this past week, which means he'll be around until just before his 52nd birthday. As far as Hogan is concerned, with all the new money coming in with the Thursday show and considering his value with the movie ratings and the buy rate for the Piper match, he's going to be able to command huge money, and so he probably will and should play all avenues out, but it's hard to believe he'll end up anywhere else. The idea that WWF would cut hard to make room for Hogan's salary misses the entire point of Hogan and why the big stars are paid so much in the entertainment world. Much as people will hate to admit this because he's out for himself and he's so bad in the ring, he is worth every penny he makes and then some, because he draws that and more. WWF wouldn't have to cut people loose to make room for his salary, because Hogan, one would think, would draw in revenue every bit as much and more than he gets paid in the first place. If he couldn't and they thought he was asking more than he could draw, he's not worth it to begin with, and cutting other people's contracts wouldn't make him then worth more. As far as the top players in this industry are concerned, whether it be Hogan, Savage, Hart, Austin, or whomever, the idea that there is a finite budget for talent they need to fit into like an NFL salary cap is ridiculous, because the companies are carried by the big names. It's the mid-card guys that budgeting works with because they are generally replaceable. If, using Savage as an example, WCW loses him and his estimated $1 million per year salary, does that mean there is $1 million extra to pay the other boys? No, it actually may mean there is less to pay the other boys, because Savage is worth more than $1 million per year to the company, largely due to the Slim Jim ads and exposure he gives them, as much as his drawing power and name recognition to the product, and actually losing him would be a bigger cut in company revenue than the amount saved by not paying his contract. The only house show of the week was November 22nd in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which drew 3,789, paying $63,685. Scotty Riggs joined Raven's group on the Nitro show. A short blonde wrestler who will end up being called Skank also joined at the pay-per-view. Don't know much about him other than believe he is from the power plant. The December 8th Buffalo Nitro advance has topped $200,000. Advances as of the weekend for Nitros on December/15 in Charlotte is $3,466 paying $68,000, December/22 in Macon $4,335 paying $95,000, and December 29th in Baltimore is $4,900 paying $123,000. Weekend ratings saw main event at 1.1, Saturday night at 2.0 and pro at 1.1. Even with a Hart signing, at this point WCW hasn't made any real effort at booking shows in Canada in 1998. Bischoff in a Prodigy chat ripped WWF for the degree of sexual content and racial overtones that played during children's programming in the morning. I read a copy of his online chat where he compared the sexual content and racial content of his program, and he said he isn't doing things that haven't been done before, and he singled out NYPD Blue. That's the kind of poor judgment that if he does go out of business, he has nobody to blame but himself. While NYPD Blue has exposed derrieres and sexual content, one only has to look at the advertisers that ABC includes in that programming, and you'll see that clearly that program is targeted toward adults, while McMahon's programming is clearly targeted as children, in many cases children under 12 years old. For the USA Network and Vince McMahon to suggest that it's okay to produce programming with a degree to sexual content, racial overtones and in my opinion general bad taste while obviously selling their program to advertisers that are targeting children's toys and candy, I think it's nothing short of professional and social irresponsibility on the part of McMahon and the people who work with him, and the USA Network. On the subject of creative control by wrestlers, given the circumstances that we unfortunately all witnessed, or at least have knowledge of, with regards to the Bret Hart situation, it's clear to see why wrestlers would want creative control. If you can't trust the people you work with and for, it's very difficult to put your career in the hands of people who, if given half a chance, would attempt to ruin your career. Actors have an opportunity to look at a script before they accept a role, and then decide whether they want to risk their career with a specific script or director. Wrestling isn't like that, as we all know. There is a big difference. I think violation of trust is one of the things that has created the kind of atmosphere that I have heard exists in the WWF locker room. Gene Okerlund is involved with a burger chain called Mean Gene's Burgers, which has 4 or 5 franchises in the country. Okerlund, who has family ties to Orion Food Systems of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, offered to let his name. WCW issued an internal report regarding the growth of Nitro as an arena commodity. In September 1995, Nitros averaged $14,335 per show, and in September 1997, it was $166,516. Comparing the figures for October, it was $25,180 in 1995 and $144,215 in 1997. For November, not including November 24th, it was $19,535 in 1995 and $193,856 in 1997. There is talk of a Mortis vs. Psychosis program which would end in one or the other losing their mask. A merchandise breakdown from the $139,000 total from the pay-per-view at Auburn Hills. That included 1,894 programs. Top-selling t-shirts were Sting, 898, NWO, 774, Cage, 502, 6, 489 and Savage, 165. Next hottest item was Kimberly Poster, 130. WWF. Raw is Bret on November 24th in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew a city record sellout crowd and gate of 8,074 fans paying $105,501. The show opened with Harvey Whippleman, called Handsome Harvey, dressed up in the same kind of suit as Rick Rude, with the same briefcase, walking down and doing Rude. What I'd like to have right now. Shtick. Cornette made the remark that shtick wasn't working to begin with. Michaels came out and said, looking at Harvey doing the Rude gimmick, sarcastically, that was a tough spot to fill. Michaels said he hadn't slept since the Survivor Series because of the pressure, and looking at him, I'd believe it. He looked to weigh about 185 pounds legit, as he was smaller than every WCW cruiserweight except the real tiny guys like Ray and Juventud. He said Bret would be there late in the show. Jesse Jams and Billy Gunn won the tag titles from Load in 923. After a ref bump, Animal had Gunn in the air for the Doomsday Device, but Jams clocked him in the back with a chair and Gunn pinned him. Gunn and Jams then sprinted out of the ring, through the dressing room into a car with the keys in it and took off, a spoof on how Earl Hebner left the Molson Center, and while they were pulling out, the limo showed up. Load beat up several WWF officials after the match. Goldust came out in a wheelchair and said he was a quadriplegic and had a nurse with him called Nurse Goodbody. Vader came out, said he didn't believe it, and attacked Goldust and the nurse, who turned out to be Luna Vachon, threw alcohol in his eyes. Actually, it took 2 tries because she missed the first time, injuring his eye, and he wore an eye patch for his main event match later in the show. Sergeant Slaughter did an interview that took forever, doing his early 80s shtick, saying his match with Triple H would be a boot camp match. It would have been a hell of an interview in 1984. Between times changing and people changing, the Sarge just looks so old and so damn fat in street clothes that nobody can take him seriously. It looked like somebody doing a Saturday Night Live skit, where they were pretending to do a wrestling interview. It got no reaction. The one thing I got a kick out of is they showed a brief clip of his MSG match with Pat Patterson. It was actually called an alley fight rather than a boot camp match back in 1981. When I was in college, we used to have our own nitro parties. I think they were called tape parties in those days, where we didn't mug for the cameras and act weird. And anyway, that match, along with the 1982 Flair vs. Kerry Von Erich match and the 1983 Tiger Mask vs. Dynamite Kid match, were considered the greatest matches of that era, and I probably have watched that match 100 times, which certainly makes one question my time management in those days. Brian Christopher beat Mr. Flanagan. Couldn't be called Flash because they already have Flash Funk in 333 with a leg drop off the top in the light heavy tourney, called a Tennessee Jam. Christopher looked real good, but the match wasn't good as Flanagan's offense and transitions were way too green. The people knew it and paid no attention to the match. Flanagan did take good bumps. Then came the segment where DX came out and brought out the mini Bret Hart and ran him down. Jim Neidhart came out to confront DX, but Michaels told Neidhart how great the Hart Foundation tag team was 10 years ago, and that he was the one with the experience and the charisma that Bret never had. He asked Neidhart how much of Bret's big contract is he getting. Neidhart said Bret was at home in Calgary, Bulldog was having knee surgery, and Owen was mentally distraught. They offered Neidhart a spot in DX and he said he'd think about it. Ken Shamrock beat Savio Vega in 5-11 with an ankle lock. Match wasn't good, but the finish was. Rocky Maivia did an interview. The lights and mic were flickering on and off, with the gimmick being Austin was in the control room messing with him. Finally, Austin attacked Maivia and ran off the nod with a chair, but he didn't get his belt back. Austin flipped off Maivia right in front of the cameras. Jarrett was supposed to wrestle Crush, although Jarrett kept calling him Chains. Jarrett complained that in his contract he was supposed to get a catered meal and bottled water, and how McMahon wasn't living up to it, trying to symbolize how Bret was a heel crying about his contract, and how he didn't want to wrestle Chains because he wasn't at his level. Kane ended up coming out and destroying Crush and doing the no-sell spots. Finally, Michaels beat Vader in 242. Neidhart came out with Chyna and Triple H. Neidhart and Triple H beat up Vader when he fell out of the ring. Triple H threw coffee in Vader's good eye and Michaels hit 2 super kicks for the pin. After the match, DX attacked and beat up Neidhart and left him laying. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office officially on November 19 determined that the death of Brian Pillman was from natural causes due to arteriosclerotic heart disease and that no further information will be released. The preliminary autopsy showed that Pillman only had 55% of his heart working. Yet another branch of government to lose confidence in. The Washington Times ran a story on Pillman on November 7, describing him as a posthumous cyberspace celebrity because of all the talk about him on the internet. It had quotes from his brother Phil and sister Linda. Bret Hart received a phone call from Harley Race, who told Hart that he was proud of how he handled everything in the situation and particularly what he did in the dressing room. The road shows did phenomenal business, particularly since they were in an area of the country WWF has traditionally done poorly in. On November 21 in Richmond, Virginia, they drew $7,438 and $138,148, and November 22 in Greensboro, North Carolina, they drew $13,332 and $157,536, and November 23 in Hampton, Virginia, they drew $8,236 and $128,030. DX got incredible heat in Richmond to the point it was a bad scene. Undertaker beat Triple H in a casket match and after the match put Triple H, Michaels, who was only in the corner because he only does one house show per weekend, and Chyna in the casket. Afterwards, the three riled up the crowd to the point debris was flying everywhere. One older fan got hit with an object aimed at Michaels in the temple and was bleeding badly. Michaels pulled down his pants and mooned the crowd. They had much better security the next night in Greensboro. On that show, Taker beat Michaels via DQ in a title match for the outside interference. Dude Love beat Maivia in the semis both nights. Austin didn't work any of the shows as advertised, but was in Dude's corner and gave Maivia the stunner for the finish every night. There were no mentions in posters or an announcement before the show about the Hart Foundation not being there in either Richmond or Greensboro. Bret wasn't booked in Greensboro to begin with, although there was advertising around town in which his name was used as being on the show. Mark Henry was back on the road this weekend beating Sultan and D'Lo Brown, so they are trying to get their $2.5 million contracts worth out of him. He was said to still look horrible, although better than last year. Some notes on Adam Copeland, a newcomer who started at the Ottawa tapings. He's said to be 6'4", 240, looking like Chris Jericho, and was trained by Sweet Daddy Siki and has been wrestling independently as Sexton Hardcastle in Michigan and Ontario for about 4 years. A lot has been made over a change in Ticketron policy and how it will affect the WWF. Up until this year, Ticketron used to release 75% of the advance money in cities to the promoter each week as the tickets were sold. The new policy is to release all the money owed the promoter after the show is over. So there will be a 6-week period from early January through mid-February where WWF cash flow, and WCW's as well, but they aren't a cash flow business, will be down considerably for a few weeks, but it'll all catch up with big money weeks come mid-February. It is believed Vince McMahon didn't tell Earl Hebner about the deal until just before he went through the curtain to ref the match. Even if Hebner had wanted to alert Hart, he wouldn't have been able to without it being known because he was on a headset while riffing, and had he told Hart, everyone would immediately know. The November 29th Boston show has a $153,000 advance. Weekend rating saw Livewire at 1.3 and Superstars at 2.1,